Welcome to This Is You, the podcast. As our journeys unfold, so do our identities. What makes you, you? This podcast explores how different life experiences, concepts, or themes like friendship, religion, loneliness impact how we see ourselves and the world. Join me on this journey as we talk to new guests and learn about their life experiences, reflect on our own, and see what it means for all of us going forward. Your journey to learn more begins now. Hi everyone. So this episode is going to be a solo episode, and I'm going to be talking about something that I term the myth of the linear path. And basically, it's this idea that A leads to B that leads to C, that if you follow all the steps right or correctly, then you'll finally be happy, or that you'll be able to predict what will come, or that you'll be able to be successful. And so I'm going to share 3 stories with you from 3 different phases of my life to some degree that relate to this idea, and that made me realize that really this is a myth that's holding me back. So to give you a bit of context, so my parents are immigrants who came from Pakistan, and my siblings and I were all born in Canada. When I was growing up, and if you have immigrant parents, you may relate to this, or maybe this is something that generation just believed. But there was this idea that if I went to school and got good grades, I could go to a good university, could get a great job, I could get married and have kids, and that if you followed these steps and you worked really hard, that things would lead to happiness and success. And so I did that. Like in elementary school and all the way up until university, I worked really hard. I studied really hard. I focused on my career. But I think what was happening was I was waiting to be happy. Like I kept thinking, oh, when I get to this milestone, I'll be happy. Or when I get to that milestone, I'll be happy. Or I'll feel successful when I get to this milestone or that milestone. And that didn't really happen for me. I think the milestone just kept moving. So I get to one and then be like, oh, but I don't have this figured out, or I don't have that figured out. And I would feel sort of like a failure for not knowing where I was or what I needed to do. So there's 3 parts of my life where I think this really hit me. So one was in university when I was in 3rd year. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next for my career. So I did my undergrad in human resources management. And at the time, I was working at the university as a work study student, and I'd probably been there for about a year when I started this career exploration piece. And what I wanted to figure out was, did I want to stay in HR? Did I want to pursue a master's in education or a master's of arts in education? Or like, where in education did I want to focus on? Did I want to be a teacher? Did I want to do a certificate? There were all of these different options, and I was really confused about what I wanted to do next. And, I had gotten the good grades. I was just like, oh my God, how come I don't know what I need to do? So one of the things I ended up doing, and if you're in a career exploration phase in your life right now, regardless of whether you're in university or somewhere else, I'd really recommend doing this. What I did was I ended up talking to people who were in careers that I was interested in. So I talked to people in higher education who were working in jobs I liked, people in HR, etc. And I basically did an information interview. So I asked them what they loved about their jobs, what they hated about their jobs, but also how did they get to where they were? What was their career story? And I was really surprised to find out that most people said they ended up in their careers by accident. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a very type A personality. I think I have become a little bit more laid back as time has gone on, but I'm very much like, tell me the magic formula, give me the secret to success. And when people were telling me that they ended up in their careers by accident or serendipitously, it was really difficult for me because I was like, that does not help me. If you ended up here by mistake, how do I make a plan to get to where you are? Like, I was so confused and overwhelmed and anxious. And I wonder if you guys can relate to this feeling. When you hear people got there by accident, then how do you reverse engineer that for yourself? So I was really confused. And what I realized from that experience was eventually things made sense for me. So as I had more of these conversations, I think what I was really looking for was someone to give me an answer, was someone to say, Auroosa, you should do this. Based on what we know about you, this is the ideal career for you. And nobody did that. Every person I asked was like, well, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you what I should do. And so it was really difficult. And I did have a few people who gave me some really great advice about things to think about in terms of my career to help me make a decision. So, one of them was a professor who said to think about what do I value and what type of impact do I want to have overall. And that really resonated with me. And I ended up pursuing a master's in higher education and leadership. And most of my career actually has been working at York University on campus, helping students be successful and engage in extracurricular activities. So I did eventually figure it out. But the process to get there, I thought it would be a lot more straightforward. Like, I thought I would know what I wanted to do. And I also thought that if I had a clear plan, I couldn't fail. I wouldn't make mistakes. I would feel successful or happy. And that's not really what happened. So that sort of brings me to the second story. So this has to do a bit more with this idea of adulting. I sort of grew up with the idea that at some point things would make sense. So, I would look at my parents or other adults around me and they seemed so wise and knowledgeable. And I would be like, okay, eventually things will make sense. I will not be so confused. And they never did. And it always made me feel like I was missing something or I was a failure. I kept waiting for that moment of clarity where I would be sure in how I felt and I'd be sure in what I wanted to do. And it didn't come in the way that I thought it would. So what ended up happening for me was I would go through these phases where I would think, oh, when I get to 21 or 25 or 28, I'll know all this stuff. The stuff will make sense. But I would get to that age and then it wouldn't make sense. I would still be confused. And what I've realized actually is that we're all winging it. That when you become an adult, and I don't know what age that supposedly happens, but when you become an adult or when you start to identify as an adult, it doesn't mean that you know the answers to things. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you can't make mistakes or you won't fail or you won't do something that will jeopardize something else or bad things won't happen. None of those things are true. What it means is that you do know more information than you may have known before. And more than that, you know where you can get information to help you make an educated decision. But nothing is without risk. Everything you do inherently has some risk of failure. And if you stay in the safe edges, then you'll never really get to explore what's important or what's really valuable because you'll be scared to do that. And being scared, I think, is really normal. I mean, I'm definitely scared even doing this podcast. But I think in pushing yourself to take chances, you learn so much more. And realizing that adulting is less about knowing the answers and more about feeling confident enough to take risks and be wrong helps to free up a different world that you can explore. When I realized that, okay, there was no linear path, that even if I did A, B, C, and D, that didn't guarantee anything, and A, B, and C, and D didn't really even exist. At first, it gave me a lot of anxiety. And I was like, oh no, what am I supposed to do then? How do I make a decision? But then after, what I realize now is that it's also really freeing. What it basically means is that I can do different things. And even if they're not, quote unquote, the right decision, I can always pivot, learn, and grow from that. So I actually met a professor once who told me a story about how after she finished her undergrad, she pursued her CMA, which is the designation in accounting. That's very difficult to get. After she finished, she actually also did her CFA, which is also a very difficult designation to get, and that was in finance. And after doing both of those, she decided she didn't want to pursue either. Neither of them were going to be the career that she wanted. And at first she felt like, oh my God, I wasted all this time. But it actually ended up opening another door for her later down the line. She ended up becoming a professor that taught courses in accounting and finance, and she could only do that because she had these designations. So even though you may take a step or a chance, and in the immediate it may not work out, you might find that later on that experience or that knowledge comes back and helps you in a different way, helps you to do a completely different thing that you wouldn't have imagined. So everything is an investment in yourself, and everything is an investment in your journey, and nothing is really lost. So when you think about it in that way, instead of being afraid of failing or being afraid of taking the wrong step, that everything could be the right step or help you somewhere down the line, or at least be a learning opportunity, it can sort of free you to make decisions without agonizing over them. And I'm still working on that. That's still something that I do, that I'm trying a lot more to do less of. If I don't get the right product, it doesn't matter. The world will not fall apart. My world won't fall apart. And I won't suck just because I made a mistake. And that's something that I really grown and learned. And the last story I'm going to share is about having kids. So I have a son who's 5, and I'm actually expecting my second son at the end of July, which is why I'll go on hiatus for a little bit in this podcast. So with parenting, I thought it was the same thing. Like when I would hear parenting stories before I became a parent, like of kids not sleeping or not eating, I would devise like a strategy in my mind. Like I even watched like the Super Nanny and other shows related to discipline and kids because I thought if I had all this information, I could do it right and like nip certain problems in the bud before they started. But then when I actually had my son, I realized that there are so many different things that go into making us who we are, and that there isn't a formula to necessarily get your kid to sleep or eat. Like every kid is different, every kid has a different temperament. And so, yes, you can try different strategies and something might work for you, but it's not like if you do A, B, and C perfectly, that your kid will never fail or that your kid will never hurt, or that like if they do those things, that means you're a terrible parent. And that has been a very hard realization for me and something that I really, really try working on. And one of the ways that I do that is I talk to my son a lot about how I'm learning just like he's learning. I've never been a mom before. This is my first time, and I'm learning just like he's learning, and we're going to make mistakes together. And sometimes I might say the wrong thing, but I'm trying. And I want him to try too, to communicate with me and to share things with me. And then you never reach a stage where you know everything. So I'm really hoping by sending these messages to my son that he won't have some of the fears that I've had around making mistakes or being afraid of failure, or really this misnomer that there is a linear path that if you follow, things will be all right. There isn't. Life is chaotic, it's messy, and that can be very liberating and freeing too. So to sort of wrap this episode up, I want to close with a quote from The Magic School Bus of all places. So it's a show that my son watched and I actually used to watch as a kid. And Miss Frizzle, who is the teacher, she has a motto. So Miss Frizzle's motto is take chances, make mistakes, and get messy. And I really like this quote because I feel like it's something that first goes so against my nature, but I'm trying really hard to do it. But also because it sort of shows how important it is to just take chances and to just get in there. And Brene Brown talks a lot about this too, like getting in the arena. That's the most important thing instead of just thinking about it. So if there's something that you're contemplating right now and you're like, should I do it? Should I not do it? Take a step and just try and see what happens. The worst thing that could happen is that you might fail or it might not be a good fit, but you won't know until you try. And that's what I'm learning through doing this podcast too. I don't know if it will be successful or if people will resonate, but I'm trying and I'm learning and I'm going to go from there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Feel free to connect with me and let me know if you've also believed this myth of the linear path, or if you've somehow figured out a formula that I don't know about that can guarantee me happiness and success. Please tell me. I feel like happiness, you have to live in the moment and enjoy every moment for what it is, because there's never going to be a point where you're like, now I deserve happiness. You deserve happiness today. So be happy, embrace everything else. And you can connect with me on Instagram at This Is You Podcast, on Facebook at This Is You Podcast, or you can send me an email at thisisyupodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, take care.